The wine in my glass was a vintage Merlot, perfectly aerated. But it couldn't wash away the bitter taste of watching Jax's hand linger on my wife's lower back a second too long. To everyone at this charity gala, I'm just Roman the data analyst, boring, safe, invisible, while he is the golden boy of the MMA octagon, oozing the kind of danger Natalia craves. They think I don't see the smirks, the stolen glances, or the way she looks at him with a hunger she hasn't shown me in years. They don't know that reading threat levels is what kept me alive in places that don't exist on maps. There are secrets that keep a marriage together, and secrets that tear the world apart. If you want to see which one breaks first, stay with me. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made everything look like it was crying. I watched the droplets race down the floor-to-ceiling glass of our penthouse living room, distorting the city lights below into smeared streaks of neon. It was quiet inside, the kind of silence that feels heavy, pressurized, like the cabin of an aircraft before the hull breaches. You're still wearing that tie? Natalia's voice cut through the silence. Not sharp, just weary. She stood by the kitchen island, nursing a glass of Chardonnay she didn't need. She was beautiful in that sharp, curated way. Blonde hair pinned back flawlessly. A silk blouse that cost more than my official monthly salary as a risk advisor. It's a charity dinner, Nat, I said, keeping my voice level, the tone of a man who files spreadsheets for a living. I thought I should look presentable. You look like a banker at a funeral, she sighed, taking a sip. Her eyes didn't meet mine. They were fixated on the notification lighting up her phone screen on the marble counter. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The vibration pattern was distinct. Short, rapid buzzes. Instagram direct message. Jax Thorne. Maybe a funeral is appropriate, I muttered, turning back to the window. What was that? Nothing. I said the traffic looks bad. I adjusted my cufflinks. They were silver, unremarkable, chosen specifically to blend in. For the last 5 years, that had been my mission objective, blend in. Be Roman Vance, the boring husband, the reliable provider, the man who never raises his voice. It was the perfect cover for a man who had spent the decade prior dismantling insurgent cells in Eastern Europe and Northern Africa. But the hardest part of being undercover wasn't the danger. It was the disrespect. Natalia walked over, the scent of her expensive perfume trailing behind her. Sandalwood and secrets. She stopped a few feet away, close enough for me to see the tension in her jaw, but far enough to establish that we were no longer partners, just roommates sharing a mortgage. Jax is going to be there tonight, she said, feigning casualness. The foundation invited him. He's the new face of the Fighters for Youth program. The MMA guy? I asked, playing dumb. The one with the neck tattoos? He's a champion, Roman. People like him. He has charisma. She emphasized the word charisma like it was a weapon, contrasting it against my dull existence. Try not to bore him if you talk to him. He's not interested in actuarial tables. I'll do my best to stay in my lane, I said. She finally looked at me then. Her eyes were blue, icy, and searching for something I refused to show her. Disappointment, anger, jealousy. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to scream, to break a glass, to be a man in the traditional volatile sense. But emotional volatility gets you killed in the field. So I gave her nothing. I gave her the mild, practiced smile of a man who calculates risk percentages. We should go, I said, checking my watch. The valet gets backed up after 7. She let out a short, frustrated huff and grabbed her clutch. As she walked past me toward the elevator, her phone buzzed again. She didn't check it this time, a small smile playing on her lips that she thought I didn't see. I followed her, my reflection in the hallway mirror catching my eye. The suit fit perfectly, hiding the scars on my torso and the knife strapped to my ankle beneath the pant leg. Old habits die hard. To the world, and to my wife I was prey. A beta male providing resources while the alphas circled. But as the elevator doors slid shut, sealing us in the golden box, I felt that familiar, cold clarity wash over me. I wasn't the prey. I was just the hunter waiting for the right wind. Tonight, the wind was changing. The venue for the Silverleaf Foundation Gala was a converted warehouse in the energetic heart of Capitol Hill, repurposed into an industrial chic cavern of exposed brick and velvet ropes. It smelled of expensive cologne, champagne, and the specific kind of desperation that comes with trying to prove you belong. I handed our coats to the cloakroom attendant, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. Beside me, Natalia was already scanning the room, her posture straightening, her chin lifting. She was transforming from the tired wife in the penthouse into the radiant art director everyone admired. It was a performance I had watched 1,000 times. But tonight, the audience wasn't me. "Get me a drink, would you, Roman?" she asked, not looking at me. "Something sparkling." "Of course," I said. I navigated the crowd, moving through the sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns with the fluidity of a ghost. In the field, being unremarkable was a survival skill. Here, it was just a sign of social irrelevance. I secured 2 glasses of champagne and turned back, my eyes automatically mapping the exits, the security detail, and the threat vectors. And there he was. Jax Thorne stood near the center of the room, a gravitational pull for the bored socialites. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He wore a fitted black dress shirt, unbuttoned enough to show the edges of his chest tattoos, and designer slacks that were too tight. He was holding court, laughing loudly at something a donor's wife had said, his hand resting casually on the back of a velvet sofa. He saw Natalia before he saw me. His eyes lit up, not with love, but with possession. I watched as my wife walked toward him. Her stride changed. Her hips swayed with a rhythm she hadn't used for me in 3 years. She approached him, and he didn't offer a polite handshake. Instead, he leaned in, kissing her on the cheek, his hand lingering on her bare shoulder, his fingers pressing into her skin just a fraction too intimately for a public setting. I approached them, the champagne glasses cool against my fingertips. "Jax," Natalia said, her voice breathless. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it, babe." Jax grinned, his teeth white and predatory. He finally turned his gaze to me, the smile not reaching his eyes. "And you brought the accountant." "Risk advisor," I corrected mildly, extending a glass to Natalia. She took it without thanking me. Jax stepped into my personal space. It was a classic intimidation tactic: invade the zone, force the other male to retreat. I didn't step back. I simply stood still, blinking slowly behind my glasses. "Roman, right?" Jax said, extending a hand. "Natalia talks about you. Says you're the safe bet." I took his hand. His grip was crushing, an adolescent show of strength intended to make me wince. He squeezed, his knuckles whitening, waiting for me to pull away or show pain. In my mind, I dissected the anatomy of his arm. Extensor carpi radialis. Brachioradialis. If I applied 12 pounds of torque to his wrist and stepped pivotally to the left, I could snap his radius and dislocate his shoulder before he could exhale. He would be on the floor, screaming, his fighting career over in a heartbeat. Instead, I let my hand go limp in his grip. I offered him the wet fish handshake of a man who spends his life typing on keyboards. Jax smirked, satisfied. He released my hand with a dismissive pat on my shoulder, hard enough to be disrespectful. "Strong grip," I said softly, rubbing my hand as if it hurt. "It's called work, buddy." Jax laughed, looking at Natalia for approval. She was smiling, a tight, cruel little smile. "You lift heavy things, you hit things, you get strong. Simple math. Probably too simple for a numbers guy like you, though." "We can't all be warriors," Natalia said, sipping her champagne. Her eyes were fixed on Jax's chest. "Someone has to pay the mortgage, Jax." The insult was precise, designed to reduce me to nothing more than a wallet. A utility. "Hey, don't knock the wallet," Jax winked at me. "I need someone to calculate the odds on my fight next week." "You coming to watch me demolish the Russian?" "I'm not sure if I have the time," I said. "Make time," Jax ordered, his voice dropping an octave, losing its playful edge. "Nat's going to be ringside." She likes seeing a real man work. You should come learn something. He turned his back on me then, effectively dismissing me from the conversation, and leaned down to whisper something in Natalia's ear. She laughed, touching his arm, her fingers trailing over the fabric of his shirt. I stood there for a moment, holding my own untouched glass of champagne. The noise of the party seemed to fade into a dull roar. I wasn't angry. Anger is a loss of control. I was just calibrating. I took a sip of the wine. It was warm. I'll go find our table, I said to their backs. Neither of them turned around. As I walked away, I didn't look at the floor. I looked at the reflection in the darkened window overlooking the city. A man in a suit walking away from a fight. That's what they saw. What they didn't see was the wolf pacing the perimeter of the cage, testing the lock, waiting for the handler to open the door. The dinner service was an exercise in performative elegance. Waiters in white gloves moved like synchronized swimmers, placing plates of filet mignon and truffle reduction in front of donors who were more interested in gossip than gastronomy. Jax had somehow maneuvered himself into the seat directly across from Natalia, leaving me at the head of the table, isolated. It was a power move, subtle yet screamingly obvious. He ate with his elbows on the table, cutting his steak with unnecessary force, the serrated knife screeching against the fine china. It was a sound that made the elderly philanthropist to my right wince, but Natalia looked at him as if he were devouring the world. "So, Roman," Jax said, his voice booming over the polite murmur of the room. He pointed his fork at me, a piece of rare meat dangling from the tines. "Nat tells me you spend your days calculating how likely people are to die. Is that right?" The table went quiet. 6 pairs of eyes turned to me. "I assess risk," I corrected calmly, placing my napkin on my lap. "I help companies avoid catastrophic failure. It's about prevention." "Prevention," Jax snorted, chewing with his mouth open. "That sounds like a fancy word for being scared. You spend your whole life trying to stop bad things from happening. Me? I walk into the cage and I make bad things happen." A ripple of laughter went through the table. It was nervous laughter, fueled by wine and the magnetic pull of his celebrity. Jax wasn't just a fighter to them, he was entertainment. I was the boring commercial break. "There is value in safety," I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing. Under the table, my hand rested on my thigh. I could feel the pulse of my femoral artery. Slow, rhythmic, controlled. "Safety is for sheep," Jax declared, leaning forward. The candlelight reflected in his eyes, giving them a manic glint. "Women don't want safety, Roman. They say they do, but deep down, they want fire. They want to know that the man they're with can tear the throat out of anything that threatens them." He looked directly at Natalia then. It wasn't a look of affection. It was a claim. He was marking his territory. Natalia flushed, her hand reaching for her wine glass. She didn't look at me. She looked at him, her eyes dilated. "Jax is very passionate about his philosophy," she murmured, but the tone wasn't apologetic. It was admiring. "I'm just saying," Jax continued, emboldened by her reaction. "If a guy walked in here right now with a gun, what would you do, Roman? Quote him an insurance policy? Calculate the deductible on his bullet?" The table laughed louder this time. The disrespect was palpable, hanging in the air like cigar smoke. I looked at Jax. I saw the opening in his defense instantly. He was leaning too far forward over the table. A simple thrust of a steak knife into the soft tissue under his jaw would sever the digastric muscle and puncture the tongue. He would choke on his own blood in 30 seconds. It would be silent, efficient, and irreversible. The image flashed in my mind, high definition, visceral. Then I blinked, and the image vanished. "I'd probably call the police," I said, offering the answer a coward would give. "That's what they're there for." Jax threw his head back and laughed. A harsh, barking sound. "God, that is rich. Call the police. You hear that, Nat?" He'd call for help. He reached across the table, bypassing the boundaries of social etiquette entirely, and covered Natalia's hand with his own. His hand was large, scarred, the knuckles swollen from years of impact. It engulfed her manicured fingers. "You deserve a wolf, baby," he said, loud enough for me to hear, loud enough for the table to hear. "Not a sheepdog." Natalia didn't pull her hand away. She sat frozen, caught between the thrill of the taboo and the social awkwardness of the moment. But she didn't look at me for rescue. She didn't defend me. The silence that followed was deafening. This wasn't just banter anymore. This was an act of war declared over a centerpiece of white roses. I picked up my glass of water and took a slow sip. The condensation was cold against my palm. I needed that cold, because inside the chest of the boring risk advisor the ghost operative was waking up, and he was getting very, very tired of the noise. "You know, Jax," I said, setting the glass down with a soft clink. "Wolves usually end up mounted on a wall. It's the sheepdogs that live to sleep by the fire." Jax stopped chewing. His eyes narrowed. For the first time all night, the smile dropped from his face. He sensed it then, a frequency he hadn't expected. A challenge. "Is that right?" Jax stood up, wiping his mouth with the linen napkin and throwing it onto his half-eaten steak. "Well, let's see how much fight the dog actually has." The scraping of Jax's chair against the floorboards sounded like a gunshot in the hush of the dining hall. He didn't just stand. He unfolded himself, expanding his chest, commanding attention with the practiced ease of a man who lived under floodlights. He walked to the small stage at the front of the room, taking the microphone from a startled host. The feedback whine pierced the air for a split second before Jax's voice boomed through the speakers, confident and steeped in false camaraderie. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jax began, flashing a charming grin that didn't reach his eyes. "We're all here to raise money for a good cause tonight. But let's be honest, silent auctions are boring." A ripple of polite laughter moved through the crowd. I stayed seated, my hands folded on the table, watching him. I knew the tactical play before he made it. He was cutting off my retreat routes. "My friend Roman here," Jax pointed a thick finger at me, the spotlight swinging violently to blind me, "thinks safety is the most important thing in life. He thinks risks are things to be managed on a spreadsheet. But I say, if we want to raise real money for these kids, we need to show some real fight." The room buzzed. Natalia stiffened beside me. Her face was flushed, her eyes darting between me and the stage. She looked like she was watching a car crash she had engineered but couldn't control. "So here is the offer," Jax continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical growl. "I challenge Roman Vance to a 3-round exhibition match next Saturday. If he survives 3 rounds with me, I'll donate $50,000 to the charity myself. If he doesn't, well, at least he tried like a man." The applause was hesitant at first, then raucous. They loved it. It was gladiatorial. It was primitive. It was the rich wanting to see blood on the sand while they ate their creme brulee. "You don't have to do this," Natalia whispered, leaning close. Her voice was thick with performative concern, but underneath, I heard the thrill. She wanted to see if I would break. "Just laugh it off, Roman. Tell them you have a bad back. Don't embarrass us. Embarrass us. Not get hurt. Embarrass." I looked at her. For a moment, I saw the woman I had married 5 years ago, the one who loved poetry and quiet mornings. That woman was gone, replaced by this creature who fed on adrenaline and status. I stood up. The room went dead silent. The spotlight burned against my retinas. I buttoned my suit jacket with slow, deliberate fingers. I walked toward the stage, my footsteps steady on the hardwood floor. I didn't walk like a fighter bouncing on his toes. I walked like a predator conserving energy. I climbed the stairs and took the microphone from Jax's hand. He was smirking, towering over me by 3 inches, his chest puffed out. He thought he had already won. "Jax thinks this is about sport," I said into the mic. My voice was calm, devoid of the bravado he projected. It was the voice I used during interrogations. He thinks this is a game with rounds and points. I turned to look him in the eye. Up close, I could smell the alcohol on his breath and the cheap arrogance radiating off him. I accept your challenge, I said. The crowd gasped. Jax's eyebrows shot up, genuinely surprised. But I have a condition, I continued, my voice hardening just enough to cut through the ambient noise. We don't do 3 rounds. We don't do points. We don't do judges. What do you want then, accountant? Jax laughed, crossing his arms. Thumb wrestling? No time limit, I said, holding his gaze until his smile faltered. No referee intervention. The fight stops when one of us cannot stand up. A murmur of confusion and excitement swept through the room. They thought I was posturing. They thought I was trying to sound tough to save face. Jax leaned in, the microphone picking up his whisper. You have a death wish, little man? I'll put you in the hospital. Then it should be easy money for the charity, I replied, handing the microphone back to him. I walked off the stage without waiting for his response. I didn't look at the crowd. I didn't look at the donors. I walked straight to my table, picked up my coat, and looked down at Natalia. She was staring at me with her mouth slightly open, a mix of horror and a strange, new curiosity in her eyes. I'll get the car, I said. As I walked toward the exit, I felt the shift in the room's atmosphere. Before I was a joke. Now I was a curiosity. A lamb that had just volunteered for the slaughter. But Jax didn't know the truth. He was preparing for a sporting event. I was preparing for an extraction operation. And in my line of work, we didn't leave loose ends. The drive home was suffocating. The silence inside the Audi was thicker than the fog rolling off Puget Sound. Natalia stared out the window, chewing on her thumbnail. A habit she only indulged in when her carefully curated life threatened to crack. When we finally walked into the penthouse, she spun around, the tension snapping like a rubber band. Are you insane? Her voice wasn't a scream. It was a hiss. She threw her clutch onto the sofa. Do you have any idea what you just did? Jax isn't a sparring partner at a YMCA class, Roman. He breaks people for a living. He enjoys it. I walked past her to the kitchen, loosening my tie. I'm aware of his resume, Natalia. You're aware? She laughed, a brittle sound. You sit at a desk. You analyze actuarial tables. Jax trains 6 hours a day. He's going to humiliate you. He's going to humiliate me. There it was. The core of the issue. It wasn't my safety she was worried about. It was her social standing. Being the widow of a man beaten to death in a charity match was tragic. Being the wife of a man who got knocked out in 10 seconds was just embarrassing. The contract is signed, I said, pouring a glass of water. It's done. I can fix it, she said quickly, pulling out her phone. I can call the foundation. Tell them you were drunk. Tell them you had a mental break. We can spin this. I set the glass down. Don't. The single word carried enough weight to stop her thumb hovering over the screen. She looked at me, really looked at me, trying to find the mild-mannered husband she had walked all over for years. She couldn't find him. I'm going downstairs, I said. To do what? Hide? To prepare. I left her standing in the kitchen, the blue light of her phone illuminating her confused face. The garage was cold. It smelled of concrete and gasoline. I didn't turn on the overhead fluorescent lights. I preferred the shadows. I walked over to the storage corner, moving aside a stack of dusty holiday decorations to reveal an old, locked footlocker. Inside, beneath a layer of oil-stained rags, was a simple heavy bag. I hung it from the reinforced steel beam I had installed years ago under the guise of home improvement. I didn't wrap my hands. I didn't put on gloves. I pulled up Instagram on my phone and propped it against a toolbox. Jax's latest story was playing. He was in a brightly lit gym, surrounded by an entourage. He was hitting mitts, pop, 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 fast, aggressive combinations. He roared at the camera, sweat glistening, looking like a god of war. I'm coming for you, paper pusher. he yelled in the video. I watched it 3 times. Not to be intimidated, but to analyze. Jax dropped his left hand when he threw a right hook. He overcommit to his power shots, shifting his weight too far forward. He fought with ego, not discipline. He wanted to look good more than he wanted to be efficient. I turned off the phone. The garage plunged back into semi-darkness. I stood before the heavy bag. I closed my eyes and breathed. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. The shift happened. The dullness of Roman the risk advisor peeled away, revealing the jagged edges of the operative underneath. My heart rate dropped to 45 beats per minute. I opened my eyes and struck. It wasn't a punch. It was a palm strike driving upward. My hand hit the bag with a sickening thud, the force penetrating deep into the dense sand filling. If that had been a chin, the brain would have rattled against the skull, causing an instant concussion. I moved. No bouncing. No wasted energy. I practiced the breaks. Left parry. Step in. Elbow to the solar plexus. Duck. Ridge hand to the carotid. Low kick to the peroneal nerve. My movements were ugly to the untrained eye. There was no flair. No style. Just efficient, brutal geometry designed to dismantle the human body in the shortest amount of time. I struck the bag again, my knuckles splitting slightly. A smear of blood left on the canvas. The pain was sharp, grounding. Felt good. Felt like waking up after a 5-year coma. The problem wasn't winning. I knew I could kill Jax Thorne in under 12 seconds if I used lethal force. The problem was not killing him. I had to calibrate my violence. I had to hurt him enough to break his spirit, but leave him alive enough to keep my cover. I spent 3 hours in the dark, dancing with a ghost, while upstairs, my wife texted her lover, apologizing for her foolish husband. Let them talk. Let them plan. The sheepdog had left the building. The wolf was home. The night before the fight, the city of Seattle seemed to hold its breath. The relentless rain had paused, leaving behind a heavy, damp mist that clung to the windows of the penthouse like a shroud. Inside, the air was just as thick, saturated with things unsaid. I was in the walk-in closet, laying out my clothes for the morning. Not a suit this time. A pair of black tactical shorts and a simple gray hoodie. They looked alien hanging next to my rows of pressed dress shirts and silk ties. They were artifacts from a life Natalia didn't know existed, resurfacing like bones in a dried-up riverbed. You're really going to go through with it? I didn't turn around. I could see her reflection in the full-length mirror. Natalia was leaning against the doorframe, wrapped in a silk robe, clutching a mug of herbal tea with both hands. Her face was pale, stripped of makeup, making her look younger and more vulnerable than she had in years. The contract is signed, Nat, I said, smoothing a wrinkle on the hoodie. We've been over this. She walked into the closet, the soft sound of her bare feet on the carpet stopping just behind me. I talked to him, Roman. My hands froze on the hanger. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I turned slowly to face her. You talked to who? Jax. She whispered, her eyes pleading for understanding. I called him this afternoon. I told him you were going through a midlife crisis. I asked him not to hurt you too badly. A cold, hollow laugh built in my chest, but I strangled it before it could escape. You asked him for mercy? I asked him to be professional. She snapped, defensive now. He promised he'd end it quick. A submission in the first minute. You tap out, it's over, and we can all go home. No hospitals. No concussions. Just a bruised ego. She reached out, her fingers brushing my forearm. Her touch, once the only thing that could ground me after a nightmare mission overseas, now felt like a brand. Please, Roman, she continued, her voice softening. Just tap out early. For me, I can't watch him destroy you. I can't be the wife of the man who gets carried out on a stretcher. I looked down at her hand on my arm. She wasn't trying to save my life. She was managing a PR crisis. She had orchestrated the outcome with her lover to ensure her husband, the safe bet, didn't become a public tragedy that ruined her social season. It was a betrayal far more intimate than sex. She had discussed my weakness with another man. She had conspired to grant me safety because she believed I was incapable of earning it. I gently removed her hand from my arm, as if peeling off a piece of adhesive tape. "You shouldn't have done that," I said. My voice was quiet, devoid of the anger she expected. It was the flat, informative tone of a doctor pronouncing a time of death. "I was trying to help. You were trying to control the damage," I corrected. "But you don't know what the damage is yet." I walked past her, out of the closet and into the bedroom. I needed space. The walls were closing in. "Where are you going?" she called out, panic edging into her tone. "To the guest room," I said, grabbing a pillow from the bed we had shared for 5 years. "I need to sleep. Alone." "Roman, stop being dramatic. Come back to bed." I stopped at the doorway and looked back at her one last time. She stood amidst the luxury we had built together, beautiful and terrified, completely unaware that she was looking at a stranger. The Roman she knew, the boring, reliable insurance guy, had died the moment she begged another man to spare him. "Good night, Natalia," I said. I closed the door between us. I didn't lock it. I didn't need to. The distance between us was already infinite. In the guest room, I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. I visualized the anatomy of the human knee. I visualized the torque required to snap an anterior cruciate ligament. I visualized Jax's face. She had asked for a quick ending. I closed my eyes. "Don't worry, Natalia," I thought. "It will be quick." The makeshift ring was set up in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by tables costing $10,000 a plate. The contrast was grotesque. Tuxedos and champagne flutes surrounding a canvas stained with the sweat of previous exhibition bouts. When Jax entered, the room exploded. Lights flashed, bass thumped, and he jogged down the aisle in silk boxing shorts, high-fiving donors. He looked massive, a statue of bronze muscle and ego. He vaulted over the top rope, landing with a heavy thud, throwing his arms up to roar at the crowd. Natalia was in the front row, clapping politely, her face pale. She caught my eye for a second, mouthing the word please. I entered in silence. No music, just the sound of my bare feet on the carpet. I wore the gray hoodie and tactical shorts. I climbed through the ropes methodically, ignoring the scattered boos and the jeers of "Go back to the office." The referee, a hired local pro, called us to the center. "All right, gentlemen," he barked. "Clean fight. Protect yourself at all times. Touch gloves." Jax smashed his gloves against my open palms hard enough to sting. He leaned in, his mouthpiece glinting. "Remember the plan, Roman," he hissed, low enough that only I could hear. "First minute. I throw a right cross, you go down. Don't make me hurt you for real." I looked at him, at the dilated pupils, the tense trapezius muscles, the exposed chin. "Work is over, Jax," I said softly. The bell rang. Jax came out bouncing, light on his feet, feinting a jab. He was fast for a heavyweight, I'd give him that. He threw a lazy leg kick, testing my range. I didn't check it. I just stepped back an inch, letting the air displace in front of my shin. "Come on, insurance man," he taunted, dropping his hands. "Hit me. Is that all you got?" He lunged forward, throwing a looping overhand right. The money punch intended to look good for the cameras but missed by a fraction so I could take my dive. I didn't dive. I stepped into the arc of the punch. The crowd gasped as his forearm collided with my shoulder, but instead of crumpling, I stood like a pillar of concrete. Jack stumbled, off balance from the lack of impact he expected. Confusion flickered in his eyes. "Lay down," he growled, swinging a left hook to my ribs. This one had real heat behind it. He was getting annoyed. I took the hit. I absorbed the kinetic energy, exhaling sharply as his glove dug into my oblique. Pain blossomed, hot and familiar. It was good. Cleared the cobwebs. "Is that it?" I asked. Jax's face twisted in rage. The showman vanished. The thug appeared. "All right, you want the hospital? You got it." He roared and unleashed a flurry of strikes. Wild, aggressive, undisciplined. He was used to opponents who covered up or ran away. He wasn't used to someone who saw punches as mathematical equations of trajectory and velocity. I slipped a jab, ducked across, parried an uppercut. Then I saw the opening. Jax committed to a heavy roundhouse kick, putting all his weight on his left leg. It was a fatal error. I moved. I didn't strike his face. That was for amateurs. I drove the heel of my foot directly into the side of his planted knee. Crack. The sound was wet and loud, echoing through the silent ballroom. It wasn't a bone breaking, but the popping of the lateral collateral ligament. Jax screamed. A high, shrill sound that didn't match his size, and his leg buckled. As he fell, I caught his right arm. I didn't let him hit the canvas. Not yet. I twisted his wrist, applying a kotegaeshi lock, but I modified it. I drove my thumb into the nerve cluster in his armpit while simultaneously hyperextending his elbow joint against my chest. Jax dropped to his knees, paralyzed by a level of pain his brain couldn't process. He wasn't knocked out. He was fully awake, feeling every nerve ending firing in agony. I leaned down, my face inches from his sweating, terrified ear. I held him there, suspended in torture, controlling his entire body with just one of his arms. My wife asked for mercy. I whispered, my voice calm amidst the chaos. "This is mercy. If I wanted to, I could have severed your spinal cord before you hit the floor." I applied a fraction more pressure. Jax shrieked, tapping the mat frantically with his free hand. Tap, 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 tap. The referee dove in, waving his arms. "It's over. It's over." I released him instantly. Jax collapsed into a fetal position, clutching his knee, sobbing into the canvas. The great MMA champion, reduced to a weeping child in under 40 seconds. I stood up and adjusted my hoodie. I wasn't winded. I hadn't even broken a sweat. The room was dead silent. No applause. No booing. Just the collective shock of 300 wealthy people realizing they had just witnessed something feral. I looked down at Natalia in the front row. Her hands were covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that bordered on realization. She was looking at me, but for the first time in our marriage, she wasn't looking past me. She was seeing the man who had been hiding in plain sight, and she looked terrified. I walked back to the locker room alone. The corridor, previously filled with chatter and waiters carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres, was now abandoned. As I passed a security guard, he averted his gaze, pressing his back against the wall to give me space. Fear. It was a scent I hadn't smelled in 5 years, and I realized with a dark satisfaction that I had missed it. It was honest. Unlike respect or love, fear couldn't be faked. Inside the small changing room, I stripped off the hoodie and the shorts. My body felt electric, the adrenaline tapering off into a cold, sharp focus. I dressed quickly, putting on the charcoal suit, the white shirt, the tie. I tied the knot perfectly. The mirror showed Roman the risk advisor again, but the eyes were different. The glass couldn't contain them anymore. The door creaked open. Natalia stood there. She looked shattered. Her mascara was smudged, and her hands were trembling as she clutched her purse. She looked at me as if I were a stranger who had just broken into her house. "Who are you?" she whispered. It wasn't a rhetorical question. I picked up my watch from the bench and fastened it. "I'm the man you married, Natalia. I'm just the part of him you didn't want to see." "You broke him," she said, her voice shaking. "Jax, he's still on the floor. Ideally, the doctors say he might never fight again. You destroyed him." "He wanted a wolf," I said, picking up my bag. "He got one. Why didn't you tell me?" She stepped into the room, tears finally spilling over. "Why did you pretend to be this boring, weak?" I stopped at the door and looked at her. The tragedy wasn't that she had cheated. The tragedy was that she had looked at peace and called it boredom. She had looked at safety and called it weakness. Because I wanted a life where I didn't have to hurt people, Nat, I said softly. I wanted to see if I could live without the noise. You brought the noise back. I walked past her. She reached out to grab my arm, but then pulled back, afraid to touch me. That flinch told me everything. The marriage wasn't just dead. It was decomposed. I didn't wait for the valet. I took a cab to the penthouse. The ride was silent. The city lights of Seattle blurred past, meaningless streaks of color. Inside the apartment, the silence was waiting. It used to feel oppressive, filled with Natalia's unspoken judgments. Now it felt like a vacuum. I didn't pack clothes. I didn't take the books or the expensive watches she had bought me to make me look the part of a successful husband. I went to the safe in the study. I typed in the code, not my birthday, but the date of my last extraction in Kabul. I took out a single black duffel bag and a manila envelope. I placed the envelope on the kitchen island, right next to the empty wine glass she had left earlier. Inside were the divorce papers signed and dated 2 days ago. Next to them I placed my wedding ring. The gold band made a hollow sound against the marble. My phone buzzed. Secured line. Status, a voice said on the other end. Gruff. Familiar. Cover is blown, I said, looking around the apartment one last time. Asset is ready for extraction. Copy that, ghost. Transport is 2 minutes out. Welcome back. I hung up. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open, and Natalia rushed in, breathless. Her heels clicking frantically on the floor. She saw the bag on my shoulder. She saw the ring on the counter. Roman, wait, she pleaded, stopping by the island. She looked at the ring, then at me. We can talk about this. We can. I can learn. I can understand. You can't, I said. I pressed the call button for the elevator. You like the idea of danger, Natalia, but you don't like the blood. And there's always blood. Where are you going? She cried out as the doors began to close. What do I tell people? Tell them I was boring, I said. Tell them I was safe. Tell them I went away. The doors shut, cutting off her sobbing face. I descended into the lobby and walked out into the cool night air. A black SUV was idling at the curb, its engine purring softly. The window rolled down, and a man I hadn't seen in half a decade nodded at me. I threw the bag in the back and climbed in. As the car pulled away, merging into the traffic, I didn't look back at the penthouse. I didn't look back at the life of Roman Vance. He was a good man. He tried his best. But the world didn't need good men tonight. Needed me.